I'd really love for you to tell us about who you are and where you train, and what you're dancing and doing now.
Yeah. So my name is Elizabeth, or Liz. I sort of fell in love with ballet at a young age. I think I started just with like mommy and me classes with my mom, and then gradually that turned into a love for training hard in classical ballet. I started at like a pre-professional school near me called Greenwich Ballet Academy when I was around the age of 7, and then I started training in the city at Ellison Ballet when I was 13.
Mhm.
And when I was 17, I started with ABT Studio Company.
So you
Yeah.
went from Ellison to the studio company. You didn't go through the JKO track. That's the pre-professional school of ABT, which very often will feed into the studio company. So Liz, the reason why I really wanted to have you on here was because you didn't really follow that traditional path. So it's would be awesome for you to kind of just, lead us through that track.
Yeah. I was training at Ellison, and kind of near the end of my path there, um, I did some competitions, and sort of from there it kind of all unraveled, and that's sort of how I joined Studio Company. But um, I guess it is not a traditional path, but it was kind of fun in the sense that it was a little bit different. Intense, very
Yeah,
hands-on, but
yeah,
very good.
yeah, definitely. So let's talk about being in a studio company. And for everyone tuning in who doesn't know, a studio company, also sometimes called a second company, is usually affiliated with a larger professional company. Often it really involves about like 6 to 12 performers or dancers. So can you talk to us about your experience in ABT2?
Yeah. So I started when I was 17, and I was actually, I luckily was able to be kind of in like a normal studio company life for 3 weeks. And then,
Right before COVID.
yeah, I had a few injuries, and then I was back and they needed another dancer. So I joined kind of at a random point. I joined
Mhm.
in February of 2020. my
Wow.
I don't know when it is anymore. It's very confusing. And then I've been there since. But I did get to have like 3 normal weeks. So I went on 2 like small tours, kind of just to like colleges around the New York City area, which was so cool to kind of get a feel for how it would be. And then we were supposed to go to London for this program called International Draft Works to premiere a piece that they had been working on, but that didn't happen because of COVID. And then we went to Zoom. So I know what it's like, sort of, but I kind of only had a first glance of what it is like without COVID. But we did have a few like ballet bubbles, which are kind of an enigma in themselves. We like quarantined for 2 weeks in isolation. So each of us like fly to the destination. Usually I am lucky, it's pretty close to home, so I just drive. And we're in like single rooms for 2 weeks. We're tested before we go, and then after the 2 weeks are up, they take our temperatures every day. We have little daily forms to fill out, and then we're able to dance together for a few weeks without masks, and then we film it and perform. So those were really exciting to be a part of, and kind of something nice to look forward to with everything that's going on.
Yeah, but it must have been a little bit hard to get into the rep, having to come from Zoom and then having to go into the bubble. That's got to be like a huge learning curve.
Yeah. We had to. So our first one, we kind of took the rep that they had been doing for like the normal
Mhm.
2019-2020 year, um, and added a few things, but mostly we stuck with that rep. So that was kind of made sense. Most people knew the rep, and then there were some new pieces. But for our recent bubble, we had like a whole new set of rep because it was kind of a new year,
Mhm.
and we ended up learning most things on Zoom. Learned them at home, and then we got there, and then we would kind of have to like try it out with our partners to like, because like with partnering it's so different, because we learned a few pas like by ourselves. We would be like, this is where I am, but you don't know where your partner is.
Okay,
um,
what would you feel the major benefits are to joining a second company?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a bunch of benefits. I certainly performing, there you have a lot of performance opportunities in a second company because generally you're kind of touring each weekend, and you get a chance to do a variety of rep, which has been really cool. Um, and besides that, it's kind of a nice bridge between life in a school and life as a professional because you're not quite there yet where you're fully a professional, but you're also not in a school anymore. So it's kind of this fun middle ground where you're finishing like your school, but you're also kind of like dipping your toes in like a professional life.
Right. Right. It kind of reminds me, I don't know if this is the best analogy, but like the summer after senior year of high school where it's like
Yeah.
there's this where you start college,
Yeah.
but like it's like that bridge in between
Right, exactly.
the abilities of being a senior and then going off to college.
Yeah.
What challenges you've maybe faced either in a studio company or perhaps more of your challenges were felt as a student in a pre-professional school? Like how would those differ?
Yeah. I mean, I think in a school, you're lucky because, at least especially where I was, we had a lot of corrections and a lot of very intense training. We had a lot of time. If we were doing a performance or some sort of competition, we would spend months preparing one or two variations, sometimes more, but months went into not a lot of work. Whereas and it's in a company or a second company, you have no time and you have less attention because it's more about figuring out like what you need to do for yourself. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge between uh, life like in a school and in a second company. But I kind of was, my teachers did tell me that. They were like, once you move on, like, you're going to have to figure this out yourself. We're not going to be yelling at you every day. But it's definitely a tricky transition because it's
Yeah,
just different energy.
totally. And that attention in a school setting, you get used to it progressing.
Right.
Can you talk to us about your relationship with food?
Yeah, of course. Let's see. I'm not vegan or vegetarian or anything. I do like those options sometimes. It depends on my mood. Like anything is fun. For me, I kind of just go with what my body tells me. If I'm craving chocolate, I'll have some chocolate. I do like to
Mhm.
have dessert on a daily basis because I think it's fun.
Yeah, because a lot of dancers can develop a fear with food, and
Mm,
really lose touch with the fun and the joy that food can actually bring to our lives. And this is
right.
really what we see often with disordered eating. So I think it's very refreshing to hear, how you are able to remember that food can actually be fun and you can still be successful as a dancer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think also like as I got older, I kind of got into like baking and cooking, and that's kind of a whole outlet in itself just for like general stress relieving. But that kind of makes it more fun also when you're like, what should I make for dinner? What do I want to bake today?
Mhm.
Because then you're still like, you're kind of building what feels like a happy relationship with food when you get to kind of play with what you're making.
And would you say growing up, you always had this maybe like an interest in food?
I mean, I didn't really start like making my own food until like very recently, but I did always have an interest in food and like trying new things or I mean, I definitely have my favorite foods, but I like to experiment a little bit.
Awesome. And one thing about COVID and being home, and of course, having the time that we had, was that it really did allow us, or some of
Yeah,
us, to start to experiment in the kitchen and utilize that time to, reintroduce, or if a dancer never had or hasn't had that love or fun with food in a while, it
right.
allowed them to dive into that work.
Exactly.
Was there ever a time throughout your dancing, whether that was on your pre-professional, your Ellison days, or now, where you really more than usual felt that there was a connection between like what you put on your plate or what you're putting in your body and how you're dancing on stage or in class?
Yeah. I mean, I think like as I got older, I kind of recognized that like what I put into my body is fuel for dancing.
Mhm.
But at the same time, like, not everything has to be like something that's going to be perfect for what I need to eat for my dancing. So kind of like finding a balance between like, what do I want to eat, and like, oh, I have to dance for 6 hours today. What would be good in terms of that?
Mhm.
And I think I got just, I mean, as I got older, I think I was just a little bit more aware of like balancing those.
Yeah, and that's so important, that balance, because, as
Right.
dancers, athletes, that we do need to utilize that proactive approach in regards to like fueling our day to day. If you have a 7 6 7 hour day of dancing ahead of you.
Right. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
true. I feel like I usually am hungry when I am dancing. I'm one of those people, like, I'll dance and then I'm like, I have to eat.
That's usually where you probably rely on those snacks in your dance
Right.
bag and just options. And for the dancers listening who are like, well, I don't feel hungry in between classes, well, that's where we need to plan ahead. So often, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, sometimes we genuinely like might not feel that hungry while we're dancing so much or while we're so busy. Do you find it hard though to plan when you are so busy?
I mean, I kind of like meal planning. Like I make my little lists and then I like
Mm,
make it all like pretty. So it's kind of like an activity in itself. But sometimes I guess, but most of the time I think it's sort of fun to plan it out.
definitely. So, Liz, there's no doubt that as dancers, we do face pressures in regards to body aesthetics just throughout our pre-professional days and even our professional days. I'd love to hear a bit about how you've been able to um, persevere in your dancing without those pressures being an interference to your
Hmm.
success bar.
Yeah. There definitely was a point, especially when I was a little bit younger and when I was growing and developing, where I did have some body shaming, which was a little tough because I was really young and I was growing and, just on my own path, a little bit slower than maybe other people, but I was on a path. And people would say things that just were untrue, and things like, oh, like just eat a cookie, or you have this disorder and this disorder. And everyone has welcome to have their own opinion, but it was sort of challenging when I was young to kind of hear those things and read those things. But what was comforting is that like I knew I was okay, and my doctor knew I was okay. My teachers knew I was okay. Like the people who were like in my corner supported me and knew that I was just a late grower, a late developer, whatever you want to call it. I was okay. I just was a little bit smaller.
For a late bloomer.
Exactly. So I think just having like some people in my corner was definitely helpful because I felt more supported, and that I knew I was okay. They knew I was okay. It just from an outside view, other people had their own opinion.
And sometimes those external comments can actually weigh a lot on a dancer. And it sounds like you had a very strong support system, which
Yeah,
helped you kind of like steer clear of what could have happened. But
right.
one that is true is that even hearing a comment like that sparks awareness towards your body. And I think that's something that could actually be still very dangerous for a young dancer who's just
Yeah,
trying to on this, newfound passion that they might have. And then, the second a comment is passed like that, that can immediately spark second guessing.
yeah. I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. I really would not. But I think it was just comforting to have a really good support group and kind of, I mean, I don't really remember being very fazed by it all. I kind of was like, well, that's weird. I'm
Right.
fine. And then I just continued on. But if I had paid a little bit more attention to it, I think it would have been a little bit more hurtful.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
So, Liz, any advice you can give to dancers out there who might still be more on the pre-professional track, who are looking to perhaps audition down the road for a second company?
Yeah, that's a good one. Let's see. I mean, I think sign companies are always looking for like individuality. So I guess this is pretty generic, but I would probably just recommend to be yourself because everyone else is already taken and they're looking for people who have their own sparkle or their own personal way. So I think just like believing in yourself and having awareness of what is happening in the room is also a good thing. There's no need to like stand in the front and center for every combination. That they'll notice and they may not like that. So just being aware and also believing in yourself and having that confidence is definitely a challenge, but I think that's important for auditioning as well, finding that
Yeah.
balance.
Confidence is key for sure, for sure. And then my final question, Liz, would be how would you define a healthy dancer?
I mean, I think for me, a healthy dancer is probably some sort of balance of like mental health and physical health, because you may physically be healthy but be struggling with something mentally or vice versa. So I think finding the balance there. And I think for me personally, to try and find that balance um, is just taking time away to find other passions. That was kind of what I was told, like when I was injured or like even during COVID, is that it's important to find other outlets that like spark joy and you have fun with, because then you're not fully relying on ballet and then you can keep going back to it as for fun. So it's not just your main stressor. And maybe having like school or something on the side, I've always found useful, because then I can kind of, if I'm having a bad day in one, then I just go back to the other one. And I kind of like having that, um, I guess, stress of both. Because if one's not going my way, maybe the other one is.
How would you say you do balance academics with being in a second company?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely different for everyone. When I was growing up, academics were a big part of my life, and then I kind of went down the path of, oh, I want to be a dancer. So then I ended up doing high school online, which was
Sure.
not the preferred choice, but that's what we decided to do. And I did graduate high school in January of 2020. So that was done before I started Studio Company. But during COVID, I decided that I wanted to go back and do some college. So I'm doing that right now. I'm taking one class at a time, just a little bit, just to have something. But I do enjoy kind of like the mental stimulation of academics while also doing ballet, because sometimes what I'm learning, I find it kind of correlates to what I'm doing in ballet, and I can kind of use it um, when I'm dancing. Not always, but sometimes, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, this is so important. This is just the idea of not having such a one track mind, not being so hyper focused on ballet, which is easy for dancers to do because,
Yeah,
there is a huge emphasis in ballet culture that it's to be intense and to be one track minded, but that doesn't necessarily help in the long run.
right.
And so many dancers that I speak to on these interviews, we all kind of come to the same conclusion that dancers need to wear multiple hats, and that adds depth to your performance. So
Right.
you bringing other experiences, whether that's your academics, whether that's you experimenting in the kitchen, can add to your performance in the strangest but coolest of ways.
Right, exactly. And I'm definitely guilty of being like, oh, I have to only worry about ballet. Ah.
Sure.
But I do find that I feel like a much healthier dancer when I'm have different things going on.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to realize, like, there's no shame in having that one track mind, but it's
Right.
important to be aware of it and always do check-ins to realize that it's not this thing that we solve, it's a journey. We're always working, we're always checking in and being like, okay, let's take 2 steps back. Elisabeth, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's obvious that you really do have this balanced approach about listening to your body, but also knowing when and where and how you need to feel it as well. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having me.